Throughout human history, armies have clashed in confrontations that lasted mere hours or days, but altered the course of civilization for centuries afterward. These weren't just military victories or defeats. They were moments when the entire future of humanity balanced on a knife's edge. A single decision, a change in weather, or a brilliant tactical innovation during these conflicts might be the only reason our world exists as it does today. What if Athens had fallen in 490 BCE? What if the Muslims had conquered France in the 8th century? What if the Nazis had secured the oil fields of the Caucasus? The world we know would be unrecognizable. These weren't just battles. They were crossroads of history where everything changed. The shocking truth is that many of us walk through life completely unaware that our languages, religions, political systems, and even the borders of our countries exist because of the blood spilled on these ancient battlefields. The ripple effects continue to shape our lives in ways most people never realize. Let's explore the most epic battles that didn't just change their era, they changed everything that came after. The Battle of Marathon, 490 BCE. In 490 BCE, the mighty Persian Empire turned its gaze toward the small city-state of Athens. King Darius I dispatched a massive naval force to punish the Athenians for supporting rebellions within Persian territory. The situation looked hopeless. Athens stood virtually alone against the greatest empire the world had ever seen. Their allies had already surrendered or refused to fight, and Sparta, the greatest military power in Greece, delayed sending troops due to a religious festival. The Persian force landed at Marathon, just 26 miles from Athens. The Athenians faced an impossible choice: divide their forces to defend the city, or march their entire army to Marathon and leave Athens undefended. In a decision that would echo through history, they chose to send every available fighting man to Marathon. A force of just 10,000 citizen soldiers facing a Persian army estimated at 25,000 to 100,000 strong. What happened next shocked the ancient world. The Athenian general Miltiades convinced his fellow commanders to employ a radical and untested strategy. The Greek phalanx charged directly at the Persian lines, something no army had ever dared to do against the feared Persian archers. Even more revolutionary, Miltiades weakened his center and strengthened his wings, a completely unconventional formation at the time. As the Persian archers launched their volleys, the Greeks did something no one expected. They ran toward the enemy at full speed, closing the distance before the Persians could fire multiple volleys. When the armies clashed, the Athenian center deliberately gave ground while their strengthened wings crushed the Persian flanks. Then, with perfect execution, the wings turned inward, surrounding the Persian center in history's first recorded double envelopment maneuver. The result was devastating. The Persians broke and fled to their ships in panic. Ancient sources claim the Greeks lost only 192 men, while the Persians suffered casualties in the thousands. When the battle ended, a messenger named Phidippides ran the entire distance back to Athens, the original Marathon, to deliver news of the victory before dying from exhaustion. But the true significance of Marathon extends far beyond the battlefield. Had Athens fallen, Greek democracy, then a radical, fragile experiment just a few decades old, would likely have been extinguished. The philosophical traditions of Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle might never have developed. The concepts of citizenship, democratic governance, and rational inquiry that form the bedrock of Western civilization could have been strangled in their cradle. Marathon bought Greece a crucial decade to prepare before the Persians returned in even greater numbers. This breathing space allowed the Greek city-states to form an alliance that would ultimately defeat the Second Persian invasion at battles like Salamis and Plataea. The triumph preserved the independence of the Greek city-states during their cultural golden age, allowing the flowering of art, architecture, drama, philosophy, and science that would become the foundation of Western culture. What makes this victory even more remarkable is how close it came to never happening. If the Athenians had chosen to divide their forces, if Miltiades hadn't convinced his fellow generals to attack immediately, or if his unconventional tactics had failed, the entire course of Western civilization might have taken a radically different turn. The Battle of Marathon truly stands as one of history's most consequential moments, when the future of human thought itself hung in the balance. And what happened next would prove that Marathon was just the beginning of an even greater conflict between East and West. The Battle of Gaugamela, 331 BCE, A century and a half after Marathon, the tables had turned dramatically. Now it was a Greek king, Alexander of Macedon, who brought war to the Persian Empire. After conquering Persian territories in modern-day Turkey and Egypt, Alexander pursued the Persian king Darius III deep into the heart of his empire. The two armies would meet on October 1, 331 BCE, on the plains of Gaugamela, in what is now northern Iraq. The odds seemed impossible. Alexander commanded approximately 47,000 men against Darius's force, estimated at over 100,000 troops. The Persian army included elite units, war elephants, and scythed chariots, specifically designed to cut through infantry formations. Darius had even ordered the battlefield specially prepared, flattened to give his chariots and superior cavalry the advantage. Yet Alexander possessed something Darius did not: military genius bordering on the supernatural. The night before the battle, his advisors urged him to attack under cover of darkness to mitigate the Persian numbers. Alexander famously refused, saying, "I will not steal my victory." Instead, he did something extraordinary. He slept soundly, while Darius kept his army awake all night, fearing a night attack. As dawn broke, Alexander's plan became clear. Rather than positioning his army directly opposite the Persian center, he arranged his forces at an angle. As the Macedonian army advanced in this oblique formation, Darius was forced to extend his left wing to prevent being outflanked. This created gaps in the Persian line, exactly what Alexander was waiting for. The battle began with a Persian chariot charge that Alexander's troops neutralized by simply opening lanes in their formation, allowing the chariots to pass harmlessly through. Then, spotting a widening gap in the Persian left, Alexander led his companion cavalry in a wedge formation directly toward Darius himself. The Persian king, seeing Alexander's charge and fearing for his life, fled the battlefield, a psychological blow from which his army never recovered. With incredible discipline, Alexander's infantry held against the Persian center while his cavalry executed a series of complex maneuvers that ultimately encircled and devastated the Persian forces. The battle ended in a decisive victory that opened the entire Persian Empire to Alexander's conquest. The consequences of Gaugamela were nothing short of world-changing. The battle effectively ended the Achaemenid Persian Empire, which had ruled much of the known world for over 2 centuries. Alexander would go on to create one of history's largest empires, stretching from Greece to northwestern India. But the most profound impact wasn't military or political, it was cultural. Alexander's policy of cultural fusion, symbolized by his mass wedding of Macedonian officers to Persian women at Susa, created what historians call the Hellenistic world, a unique blending of Greek, Persian, Egyptian, and Indian cultures. Greek language, art, and philosophy spread throughout the ancient Middle East and Central Asia. Libraries and learning centers like Alexandria in Egypt became repositories of human knowledge. This cultural exchange preserved and expanded upon Greek learning that would otherwise have remained isolated to a small corner of Europe. Later, when Rome conquered the Hellenistic kingdoms, it absorbed this blended Greek Eastern culture, ensuring these ideas would be transmitted to future European civilization. Concepts in everything from mathematics and medicine to art and literature that we consider foundational to human progress might never have survived or developed without Alexander's victory at Gaugamela and the Hellenistic world it created. The battle also represented a turning point in military history. Alexander's innovative combined arms tactics, the coordination of different types of units like heavy infantry, light infantry, and cavalry in complex battlefield maneuvers, would influence military thinking for centuries. Roman generals studied and adapted Alexander's methods, creating the military machine that would dominate the ancient world for the next 500 years. But the Roman war machine wasn't invincible, and its greatest defeat was about to change the map of Europe forever. The Battle of the Teutoburg Forest, 9 CE. In the year 9 CE, 3 Roman legions marched through the dense forests of Germania, modern-day Germany, under the command of Publius Quinctilius Varus. Rome had recently conquered the region, and these troops, approximately 20,000 soldiers plus support personnel, were returning to their winter quarters. The Romans moved with confidence, believing the local Germanic tribes had been pacified and partially Romanized. They were catastrophically wrong. Unbeknownst to Varus, a Germanic chieftain named Arminius had orchestrated a massive secret rebellion. What made this betrayal particularly shocking was that Arminius had served in the Roman auxiliary forces, had been granted Roman citizenship, and was even considered a trusted advisor to Varus. Arminius had spent years learning Roman military tactics, knowledge he would now use to destroy them. As the Roman columns stretched for miles through the unfamiliar forest, Arminius put his plan into motion. Germanic warriors had secretly constructed a series of earthen walls along the Romans' path, forcing them into an increasingly narrow corridor. Torrential rain had turned the ground to mud, slowing the Romans and making their formation even more extended and vulnerable. When the trap was finally sprung, the Roman forces found themselves ambushed from all sides in terrain that neutralized their superior discipline and tactical organization. Unable to form their standard battle formations in the dense forest, the legionaries were attacked by Germanic fighters who would emerge from the trees, strike, and disappear again. The Romans couldn't effectively counterattack against an enemy that seemed to materialize from nowhere. For 3 days, the slaughter continued as the desperate Romans tried to fight their way out of the forest. By the end, all 3 legions, the 17th, 18th, and 19th, had been completely destroyed. Varus committed suicide rather than face capture, and the Romans lost their military standards, golden eagles that held immense symbolic importance. The defeat was so complete that the legion numbers were never used again in the Roman army, considered forever shamed. When news reached Emperor Augustus in Rome, he was reportedly so devastated that he banged his head against the wall, crying out, "Quinctilius Varus, give me back my legions." For months afterward, he would let his hair and beard grow as signs of mourning, and on the anniversary of the defeat, he would dress in mourning clothes. The consequences of this battle were immediate and permanent. Augustus abandoned all plans to conquer Germania east of the Rhine River. What had been envisioned as another province of the empire instead remained independent tribal territory. The Rhine became the permanent northeastern frontier of the Roman Empire, a border that would have profound implications for European history. This single battle essentially created the cultural and linguistic division between Latin Europe and Germanic Europe that persists to this day. Had Rome conquered and Romanized Germania as it had Gaul, France, the Germanic peoples might have adopted Latin-based languages and Roman cultural institutions. Instead, distinct Germanic languages, legal concepts, and cultural traditions developed independently. This division would shape European history for the next 2,000 years. The Rhine frontier, established after Teutoburg, became one of history's most significant cultural boundaries. To the west, Latin-based languages and Roman legal traditions. To the east, Germanic languages and customs. This linguistic and cultural frontier still roughly corresponds to the borders between modern Romance language countries like France and Germanic countries like Germany. The battle also revealed the limits of Roman power and likely contributed to Rome's eventual strategy of defense rather than continuous expansion. Future emperors would build elaborate border fortifications rather than continuing Augustus's policy of aggressive conquest. This strategic shift would have profound implications for Rome's historical development and ultimate fate. Centuries later, when Rome finally fell, it would be Germanic peoples, descendants of those who fought at Teutoburg, who would establish the kingdoms that eventually evolved into modern European nations. But before that could happen, another battle would determine whether Europe's future would be shaped by Christianity or Islam. The Battle of Tours, 732 CE. By the early 8th century, the Umayyad Caliphate had become one of history's most impressive empires. In just a century since the death of Muhammad, Islamic armies had conquered territories stretching from Spain to the borders of India. Their military prowess seemed unstoppable as they advanced across North Africa and into Europe through the Iberian Peninsula. After conquering most of Spain, Umayyad forces began raiding deep into the Frankish territory of Gaul, modern France. In 732, the Umayyad governor of Al-Andalus, Islamic Spain, Abdul Rahman al-Ghafiqi, led a major expedition north with tens of thousands of troops. After plundering several cities, the Muslim force encountered something unexpected, a large Frankish army blocking their path near the city of Tours. This Frankish force was commanded by Charles Martel, whose nickname, the Hammer, reflected his reputation as a ferocious warrior. While not technically a king, Charles effectively controlled the Frankish realms as mayor of the palace, commanding loyalty from various Frankish tribes that had previously struggled to unite against common threats. The exact details of the battle remain debated, but contemporary sources suggest the Frankish infantry formed a large phalanx on elevated ground. The Umayyad forces, renowned for their light cavalry and mobile warfare, repeatedly charged the Frankish lines for several days. But the Franks, heavily armored and disciplined, held firm against every assault. The turning point came when Frankish scouts attacked the Umayyad camp, threatening their plunder and supplies. When Abdul Rahman led his personal guard to defend the camp, he was surrounded and killed. Without their leader, the Umayyad forces retreated under cover of darkness, abandoning their campaign and returning to Spain. The battle's immediate significance was clear. It marked the furthest extent of Muslim advance into Western Europe, but its long-term consequences were far more profound. Had the Umayyad forces defeated Charles Martel, there would have been few organized military forces capable of stopping their advance deeper into Europe. The Frankish kingdoms were the strongest power in Western Europe at that time, and their defeat would have left the region vulnerable to further conquest. Charles Martel's victory enormously enhanced his prestige, allowing him to further consolidate power. This strengthened authority would pass to his son Pepin the Short, who became the first Carolingian king of the Franks, and then to his grandson Charlemagne, who would be crowned Emperor of the Romans in 800 CE, establishing the political framework that would evolve into the Holy Roman Empire. This imperial revival would profoundly shape European political development for the next 1,000 years. In many ways, Charles Martel's victory at Tours allowed for the emergence of the distinct Western European civilization that would later give rise to the Renaissance, the Enlightenment, and eventually the modern Western world. But before Western Europe could truly flourish, one more ancient empire needed to fall. The fall of Constantinople, 1453. For over 1,000 years, the city of Constantinople stood as the capital of the Byzantine Empire, the direct continuation of the Roman Empire in the East. With its massive walls and strategic position controlling access between the Mediterranean and Black Seas, the city had withstood countless sieges throughout its history, earning a reputation as the most impregnable fortress in the Christian world. By 1453, however, the once mighty Byzantine Empire had been reduced to little more than the city itself and a few scattered territories. The rising power of the Ottoman Turks under the ambitious 21-year-old Sultan Mehmed II was poised to deliver the final blow. Mehmed, obsessed with capturing the city he called the Red Apple, assembled an army of approximately 80,000 men and a powerful navy to encircle Constantinople by land and sea. Defending the city was Byzantine Emperor Constantine Shi Palaiologos, with a force of just 7,000 men, including 2,000 foreign allies, primarily Genoese and Venetian. The massive disparity in numbers was somewhat offset by Constantinople's legendary defenses, particularly the land walls, which featured a triple line of fortifications that had repelled attackers for centuries. What made this siege different was Mehmed's secret weapon, massive bronze cannons designed by a Hungarian engineer named Urban. When Urban initially offered his services to the Byzantines, they couldn't afford his fee, so he approached the Ottomans instead. The result was the largest cannon ever constructed at that time, a 27-foot monster that could fire stone balls weighing up to 1,200 pounds. These revolutionary weapons could do what no army had accomplished in a millennium: breach Constantinople's legendary walls. The siege began on April 6, 1453. For 53 days, the Ottoman cannons pounded the walls, while Byzantine defenders desperately repaired the damage each night. A critical naval chain across the Golden Horn initially prevented the Ottoman fleet from fully encircling the city. In an astounding feat of engineering, Mehmed ordered his ships dragged overland on greased logs, bypassing the chain and giving the Ottomans control of the harbor. Inside the city, Emperor Constantine rejected offers to surrender, famously declaring he would rather die than surrender the city. The final assault came on May 29. Ottoman troops poured through breaches in the walls, and Constantine, removing his imperial regalia so he could die as a common soldier, was killed in the fighting. By afternoon, the conquerors reached Hagia Sophia, the greatest church in Christendom, converting it into a mosque. Mehmed, now known as the Conqueror, entered the city and performed the Islamic prayer of thanksgiving. The fall of Constantinople sent shockwaves throughout Europe and marked the definitive end of the Roman Empire, which had existed in some form for nearly 1,500 years. But beyond its symbolic significance, This battle triggered changes that fundamentally altered world history in at least three profound ways. First, the event triggered a mass exodus of Byzantine scholars to Western Europe, bringing with them invaluable ancient Greek and Roman manuscripts that had been preserved in Constantinople's libraries. This influx of classical knowledge provided crucial fuel for the already developing Renaissance in Italy and beyond. Works by Plato, Aristotle, and other ancient thinkers that had been lost to Western Europe for centuries suddenly became available again, sparking new intellectual movements that would transform European thought. Second, Ottoman control of Constantinople gave them command of vital trade routes between Europe and Asia. The resulting disruption to trade and the high taxes imposed by Ottoman authorities incentivized European powers to seek alternative routes to Asian markets. This economic pressure directly motivated the Age of Exploration, with Portugal's attempts to circumnavigate Africa and Spain's funding of Columbus's westward voyage. These journeys of discovery would ultimately lead to European colonization of the Americas and establishment of maritime trade empires, developments that fundamentally shaped the modern world. Third, the Ottoman conquest fundamentally altered the geopolitical landscape of Eastern Europe and the Mediterranean. The Ottoman Empire now controlled the Balkans and threatened Central Europe, leading to centuries of conflict that would shape the development of countries from Hungary to Greece. The religious and cultural influence of Ottoman rule created the complex mosaic of ethnicities and faiths that characterizes the Balkan region to this day. The psychological impact on European Christians was equally significant. The fall of Constantinople intensified apocalyptic fears and contributed to religious reforms, crusading rhetoric, and artistic expressions that reflected a Christian world in crisis. Many saw the Ottoman advance as divine punishment for Christian sins, contributing to the religious tensions that would eventually erupt in the Protestant Reformation. Constantinople's fall represented not just the end of an empire, but a turning point between medieval and modern history. Yet an even greater turning point awaited the world in the 20th century, in a battle that would determine the fate of entire continents. The Battle of Stalingrad, 1942–43. In the summer of 1942, Nazi Germany stood at the height of its power. Hitler's forces occupied most of Europe, from France to the outskirts of Moscow. Now the German war machine turned its focus to a new objective, Case Blue, a massive offensive aimed at capturing the Soviet oil fields in the Caucasus region. The key to this plan was securing the city of Stalingrad on the Volga River, which would protect the German flank and sever a critical Soviet transport route. What followed would become the largest, deadliest battle in human history. The German Sixth Army under General Friedrich Paulus reached Stalingrad in August 1942. Initially, the assault seemed to follow the successful pattern of previous German blitzkrieg operations, with Luftwaffe bombing reducing much of the city to rubble. Hitler was so confident of victory that he announced in a speech, "No power on earth can shake the German position in Stalingrad." On the Soviet side, Joseph Stalin issued his infamous Order No. 227, not a step back. Soviet commanders were instructed to shoot retreating soldiers. When the city's defenders seemed on the verge of collapse, Stalin ordered the 62nd Army under General Vasily Chuikov to cross the Volga River and hold the city at all costs. What made Stalingrad unique was the nature of the fighting. The ruined city's landscape of destroyed buildings, factories, and rubble neutralized Germany's traditional advantages in mobility and firepower. Combat devolved into savage building-to-building, room-to-room struggles where soldiers measured daily advances in meters. Snipers like the famous Vasily Zaitsev hunted enemy officers from hiding spots in the ruins. Soviet soldiers called it Rattenkrieg, rat war, fighting in sewers, cellars, and confined spaces where survival often depended on who saw the enemy first. The human suffering reached unimaginable levels. Soldiers fought in temperatures dropping to -30°C, -22°F with inadequate winter clothing. Food became so scarce that there were reports of cannibalism among starving German troops. The average life expectancy of a Soviet soldier in Stalingrad was just 24 hours. By November 1942, the Germans controlled 90% of the city, but Soviet forces maintained a narrow foothold along the western bank of the Volga. Then came the Soviet masterstroke, Operation Uranus. While the Germans focused on capturing the remaining portions of Stalingrad, Soviet Marshal Georgy Zhukov assembled massive forces north and south of the city. On November, these forces launched a double envelopment, smashing through the weaker Romanian, Hungarian, and Italian units, protecting the German flanks. Within 4 days, the Soviet pincers met at Kalach, completely encircling the German 6th Army and portions of the 4th Panzer Army, approximately 265,000 men trapped in a frozen hellscape with dwindling supplies. Hitler forbade Paulus from attempting a breakout, insisting that the army hold its position while Hermann Goering promised to supply the encircled forces by air. This proved catastrophically impossible, as the Luftwaffe could deliver only a fraction of the 700 tons of supplies needed daily. A German relief operation, Operation Winter Storm, failed to break through the Soviet encirclement in December. By January 1943, the situation inside the Stalingrad pocket had become desperate. On January 31st, with his headquarters in the basement of a department store and Soviet forces just yards away, Paulus surrendered against Hitler's orders. Of the 91,000 Germans taken prisoner, only about 5,000 would ever return to Germany, most dying in Soviet captivity. The battle statistics are almost incomprehensible. Between 1.8 and 2 million total casualties, including military personnel and civilians over 40,000 Soviet civilians killed, and the near-complete destruction of a city that had housed 400,000 people before the war. But the historical significance of Stalingrad extends far beyond these grim numbers. The battle represented the decisive turning point of World War II on the Eastern Front, and arguably the entire war. Before Stalingrad, the German military had seemed invincible, suffering only temporary setbacks. After Stalingrad, the strategic initiative permanently shifted to the Soviets, who would maintain an almost uninterrupted offensive for the next 2 years until reaching Berlin. The psychological impact was equally profound. The myth of German military invincibility was shattered. For the first time, Hitler was forced to acknowledge a major defeat to the German people, declaring 3 days of national mourning. Meanwhile, Soviet morale soared, and the victory became a powerful symbol of Soviet determination and sacrifice. Stalingrad also represents one of history's clearest examples of how a single strategic mistake, Hitler's insistence on capturing the city bearing Stalin's name partly for its symbolic value, can trigger a catastrophic military disaster. By fixating on Stalingrad, Hitler diverted crucial resources from the more strategically valuable Caucasus oil fields and allowed his forces to be drawn into exactly the type of attritional warfare that favored Soviet advantages in manpower and industrial capacity. The battle's outcome shaped the post-war world in ways still felt today. The Soviet Union's eventual victory over Nazi Germany, made possible by the turning point at Stalingrad, allowed Stalin to claim Eastern Europe as a sphere of influence, creating the Iron Curtain division that would define the Cold War for nearly half a century. The boundaries established after World War II, significantly influenced by who controlled what territory when the fighting stopped, still shape many international borders and conflicts today. Perhaps most significantly, Stalingrad ensured that it would be the Soviet Union, not Nazi Germany, that emerged as the dominant power in Eastern Europe, and as one of 2 global superpowers alongside the United States. This bipolar world order would define international relations until the Soviet Union's collapse in 1991, and its after-effects continued to influence global politics in the 21st century. And then you have it. These 6 battles, Marathon, Gaugamela, Teutoburg Forest, Tours, Constantinople, and Stalingrad, represent moments when history truly hung in the balance. Each was a fulcrum upon which the future turned, redirecting the course of human development in ways that continue to shape our world. Consider how different our reality might be if these battles had gone the other way. Western democratic traditions might never have developed without Marathon. Hellenistic cultural fusion might never have occurred without Gaugamela. Germanic Europe might have been Romanized without Teutoburg Forest. The Renaissance might have taken a different form without Constantinople's fall. And the Cold War division of Europe might never have happened without Stalingrad. The borders of nations, the languages we speak, the religions we practice, the philosophical traditions we inherit, and the political systems we live under, all bear the imprint of these decisive moments when the future was determined on blood-soaked battlefields. Perhaps the most sobering thought is that similarly pivotal conflicts might be occurring in our own time, their full historical significance not yet apparent to those living through them. Just as the Athenian hoplites at Marathon couldn't have imagined how their victory would enable the birth of Western philosophy, we cannot fully comprehend how today's conflicts might shape the world 1,000 years from now. History is not a predetermined path, but a series of crossroads where human courage, genius, folly, and sacrifice repeatedly alter the destination. These epic battles remind us that at crucial moments, the actions of ordinary people facing extraordinary circumstances can truly change everything.